Imagine this. You are a young aristocrat named Marcus Flavius, barely 16 years old, standing in the marble corridors of the Domus Aurea in the year 67 after Christ. The golden walls gleam around you, reflecting light from countless oil lamps, but their warmth cannot touch the ice spreading through your veins. Behind you, your father's trembling hand grips your shoulder as imperial guards in crimson cloaks escort you deeper into the palace. Ahead, through the ornate doorway, carved with scenes of triumph and conquest, you can hear the sound that has haunted Roman nightmares for over a decade. Emperor Nero is weeping, not the quiet tears of grief that a normal man might shed, but the theatrical, consuming sobs of someone who has never learned the difference between genuine emotion and performance. The sound echoes off the marble walls like the wails of the damned, punctuated by the crash of golden cups being hurled against precious frescoes. You've heard the stories whispered in the bathhouses and forums, but nothing prepared you for this moment when the most powerful man in the world sounds like a child having a tantrum that could destroy civilizations. What you don't know yet is that you're about to become the replacement for someone who meant everything to Nero, someone whose death has driven the emperor to the very edge of madness. The young man who died 3 days ago wasn't just a companion or advisor. He was Nero's obsession, his mirror, his attempt to create the perfect version of himself. And now that he's gone, you're here to fill a void that cannot be filled, to play a role that will consume your identity and quite possibly your life. But here's what makes this story truly horrifying. You're not just a replacement. You're an experiment in human engineering, a project to see if the emperor can reshape a living person into the image of someone who no longer exists. The death that brought you here wasn't an accident or illness. It was the direct result of Nero's previous attempts to create the perfect companion, and your arrival marks the beginning of an even more twisted phase of imperial obsession. The companion you're replacing was named Sporus, a beautiful young man who caught Nero's attention not for his political connections or family wealth, but for his resemblance to the emperor's beloved wife, Poppaea, who had died years earlier under circumstances that still haunted the palace. Sporus wasn't chosen randomly from the streets of Rome. He was selected through a methodical process that combined physical beauty with psychological malleability, identified by imperial agents who scoured the empire for young men who matched specific criteria. The selection process that brought Sporus to Nero's attention reveals the systematic nature of imperial companion acquisition. Teams of scouts worked throughout the provinces, not just looking for attractive young men, but evaluating their family backgrounds, psychological profiles, and capacity for transformation. They sought boys from respectable but not overly powerful families, intelligent enough to engage the emperor intellectually, but not strong-willed enough to resist his reshaping. Sporus came from a minor senatorial family in Ephesus, recommended by the provincial governor who had noticed the boy's striking features and gentle demeanor at a public ceremony. The recommendation letter, preserved in imperial archives, described him as possessing feminine beauty combined with masculine intelligence, exactly the combination that Nero found irresistible in his quest to recreate his lost wife in male form. When Sporus arrived in Rome at age 14, he entered a world where the line between luxury and captivity had been completely erased. The imperial household didn't just house him, it began systematically transforming him into Nero's idealized companion. This wasn't simply about providing education or refinement. It was about psychological and physical reconstruction designed to create a living artwork that would satisfy the emperor's deepest fantasies. The transformation process began with subtle changes. Sporus received the finest education available in the empire, tutored by the same scholars who taught the imperial family. He learned rhetoric, philosophy, music, and poetry, not for his own advancement, but to become a more stimulating companion for an emperor who fancied himself an intellectual and artist. The education was carefully curated to reinforce Nero's own interests and opinions, creating not an independent thinker, but a sophisticated mirror. Physical modifications followed the intellectual reshaping. Imperial physicians, the finest medical practitioners in the ancient world, began treatments designed to enhance Sporus's naturally feminine features. These weren't crude alterations, but sophisticated procedures that pushed the boundaries of ancient medical knowledge. Dietary regimens controlled his physical development. Herbal treatments affected his voice and skin texture, and carefully administered hormonal manipulations altered his natural masculine development. The psychological conditioning was perhaps the most insidious aspect of Sporus's transformation. Imperial psychologists, masters of human manipulation, developed through generations of court intrigue, gradually reshaped his personality and responses. Through a combination of reward and punishment, isolation and attention, they molded him into someone who genuinely believed his greatest purpose was serving as Nero's companion. This wasn't achieved through crude force or obvious coercion. Instead, it involved sophisticated techniques of emotional manipulation that made Sporus feel grateful for his transformation. He was surrounded by luxury beyond imagination, praised for his beauty and intelligence, and given access to experiences that seemed like privileges rather than control mechanisms. The psychological conditioning was so thorough that he came to see his loss of individual identity as a gift rather than a violation. The relationship between Nero and Sporus evolved over months into something that defied easy categorization. It combined elements of romantic obsession, artistic project, political alliance, and psychological experiment. Nero didn't just want a companion or even a lover. He wanted to possess another human being so completely that they became an extension of his own will, a living proof of his godlike power to reshape reality according to his desires. Contemporary accounts describe scenes that reveal the depth of Nero's obsession with his transformed companion. Palace servants reported elaborate ceremonies where Sporus was dressed in clothing identical to what Poppaea had worn, participating in reenactments of conversations and moments from Nero's marriage. These weren't occasional indulgences, but daily rituals that consumed hours of imperial time and attention. The emperor commissioned artists to create portraits and sculptures showing him with Sporus in poses reminiscent of his relationship with Poppaea. Poets were ordered to write verses celebrating their companionship using language traditionally reserved for heterosexual marriage. The imperial household was restructured to accommodate this relationship, with Sporus given quarters, servants, and protocols normally reserved for an empress. But the psychological pressure of being Nero's perfect companion began taking its toll on Sporus in ways that became increasingly visible to the court. Historical sources describe a young man who seemed to be slowly disappearing into the role he was forced to play. His natural personality, whatever it had been before his transformation, became completely subsumed into the imperial fantasy he was required to fulfill. Palace physicians noted changes in Sporus that went beyond the intended physical modifications. He developed nervous habits, periods of depression, and what modern psychology would recognize as dissociative episodes, where he seemed disconnected from his own identity. The very success of his transformation into Nero's ideal companion was destroying his capacity to function as an independent human being. The imperial court, accustomed to witnessing extreme behavior from their emperor, found the relationship with Sporus particularly disturbing because it represented a new level of control over another person. Previous imperial favorites had maintained some sense of their own identity, even while serving the emperor's pleasure. Sporus seemed to have been so thoroughly reshaped that courtiers questioned whether the original person still existed beneath the imperial construction. Religious leaders struggled with how to categorize the relationship between Nero and Sporus within traditional Roman frameworks of family and social structure. The emperor insisted on treating Sporus as his wife, complete with marriage ceremonies and public acknowledgments. But this created theological and legal complications that had no precedent in Roman law or custom. The relationship existed in a space outside normal social categories, which added to its unsettling effect on those who witnessed it. The end came not through political conspiracy or medical failure, but through the fundamental impossibility of the project Nero had undertaken. No human being, no matter how thoroughly transformed, could permanently satisfy the emperor's need to possess a perfect recreation of his lost wife. The psychological pressure of being someone else's fantasy eventually proved fatal to Sporus in ways that contemporary sources struggle to describe clearly. Historical accounts suggest that Sporus's death involved a complex combination of physical illness and psychological collapse. The medical treatments that had transformed his body may have contributed to his physical decline, but witnesses described a young man who seemed to be dying of the impossible effort required to maintain his artificial identity. He had been so thoroughly remade to serve Nero's needs that he had lost the capacity to sustain his own existence. The imperial reaction to Sporus's death revealed the true depth of Nero's psychological dependence on his transformed companion. Rather than grieving normally and moving forward, the emperor declared that Sporus had been murdered by invisible enemies and ordered investigations that terrorized the palace household. He refused to accept that the death might have resulted from the unsustainable nature of the transformation he had imposed. Nero's grief manifested in ways that made it clear he had lost not just a companion, but a crucial component of his own psychological stability. He ordered the preservation of Sporus's chambers exactly as they had been during his lifetime, with servants required to maintain the rooms as if their occupant might return at any moment. The emperor spent hours each day in these preserved spaces, talking to the absent Sporus and becoming increasingly disconnected from the reality of governing an empire. The search for a replacement began before Sporus had been properly buried, revealing that Nero understood his obsession not as a unique relationship, but as a need that could be satisfied by finding the right substitute. Imperial agents received orders to identify young men who resembled Sporus, but the criteria quickly expanded to include anyone who might be transformed into an acceptable replacement through the same processes that had created the original. This is where you enter the story, Marcus Flavius, identified not because you naturally resembled Sporus, but because imperial psychologists determined you possessed the psychological flexibility and physical potential to undergo successful transformation. Your selection wasn't random or based on imperial whim. It was the result of careful evaluation designed to identify someone who could survive the process that had ultimately destroyed your predecessor. The psychological evaluation that led to your selection involved techniques developed through years of imperial experimentation with human modification. Court psychologists had learned from Sporus's case that successful transformation required subjects with specific personality traits: intelligence combined with emotional dependence, ambition balanced by insecurity, and, most crucially, a deep need for approval that could be exploited to make the subject complicit in their own reshaping. Your family background made you an ideal candidate for imperial acquisition. Minor nobility provided sufficient education and refinement to make you suitable for court life. But your family's political weakness meant they couldn't protect you from imperial demands. Your father's recent financial difficulties had made your household dependent on imperial favor, creating leverage that could be used to ensure cooperation with the transformation process. The physical evaluation that qualified you for selection focused not just on your current appearance, but on your potential for modification. Imperial physicians examined bone structure, muscle development, voice characteristics, and facial features to determine whether you could be successfully transformed to match Nero's requirements. The medical examination was conducted with the same clinical detachment used for evaluating livestock, treating your body as raw material for imperial artwork. Your psychological profile, compiled through months of observation, revealed the emotional vulnerabilities that made you suitable for transformation. Court agents noted your desire for recognition, your sensitivity to criticism, and your tendency to seek approval from authority figures. These traits, which might have been strengths in normal circumstances, marked you as someone who could be psychologically manipulated into accepting and even embracing your own reconstruction. The initial approach to your family was carefully orchestrated to make your selection seem like an honor rather than a conscription. Imperial representatives spoke of special opportunities for advancement, exclusive access to imperial education, and the possibility of significant political elevation. Your parents, struggling with their own financial difficulties, saw your selection as a solution to their problems rather than a disaster for your future. The contract that formalized your acquisition by the imperial household was written in language that obscured its true implications. Rather than explicitly stating that you would be transformed into a replacement for Nero's dead companion, it spoke vaguely of special service, imperial favor, and educational opportunities. The legal documents were designed to give your family the impression they were making a beneficial arrangement while actually signing away all rights to your person and future. Your arrival at the Domus Aurea marked the beginning of a transformation process that had been refined through previous experiments with imperial companions. The palace staff who received you had detailed instructions for your initial treatment, housing, and gradual introduction to imperial expectations. Every aspect of your new environment was designed to begin the psychological conditioning that would reshape your identity. The rooms assigned to you were luxurious beyond anything you had experienced in your family's declining household, but they were also carefully designed to create psychological dependence on imperial favor. The luxury was presented as a reward for your special status, rather than a tool for control, beginning the process of making you grateful for your captivity and eager to maintain the conditions that provided such comfort. Your initial interactions with palace staff were scripted to reinforce specific messages about your new role and the opportunities it represented. Servants spoke admiringly of previous imperial companions, emphasizing their influence and importance while carefully avoiding any mention of their ultimate fates. The goal was to make you see your position as enviable rather than dangerous, creating emotional investment in your own transformation. The educational program designed for your improvement combined genuine learning with subtle indoctrination. You received instruction in subjects that would make you a more interesting companion for the emperor, but the content was carefully selected to reinforce Nero's own opinions and interests. Rather than developing independent critical thinking, you were being trained to become an echo chamber that would reflect the emperor's brilliance back to him. Physical modifications began subtly, introduced as health improvements and beauty enhancements, rather than identity alterations. Imperial physicians prescribed dietary changes, exercise regimens, and cosmetic treatments that would gradually alter your appearance to better match the emperor's preferences. Each change was small enough to seem reasonable while contributing to a comprehensive transformation of your physical presentation. The psychological conditioning was even more gradual and insidious than the physical modifications. Through carefully managed interactions with the emperor, you were taught to value his approval above all else and to see your own worth primarily in terms of your ability to please him. This wasn't accomplished through obvious manipulation, but through sophisticated techniques that made you feel special and valued while gradually eroding your independent sense of self. Nero's initial interactions with you were carefully choreographed to create emotional attachment and dependence. He presented himself as a mentor and benefactor, rather than a controller, praising your intelligence and potential while subtly indicating that your future success depended entirely on maintaining his favor. The emperor was skilled at making his victims feel chosen and special rather than trapped and controlled. The comparison with Sporus was inevitable, but handled delicately during your early time in the palace. Rather than being told explicitly that you were replacing someone, you were gradually introduced to stories about a previous companion who had been beloved but was sadly no longer present. The narrative was constructed to make you want to fill that role rather than to fear sharing that fate. Your social isolation from other young men your age was achieved gradually and presented as a privilege rather than a restriction. You were told that your special status required distance from ordinary companions, and you were provided with entertainment and stimulation that made this isolation seem beneficial rather than harmful. The goal was to make the emperor and his court your only source of social connection and validation. The transformation of your daily routine eliminated almost all spontaneous or self-directed activity, replacing it with a schedule designed to serve imperial needs and preferences. Your time was structured around the emperor's schedule, your meals designed to support your physical modification, and your leisure activities chosen to reinforce your developing role as the perfect companion. Physical training became an increasingly important component of your modification as the imperial household worked to shape your body according to Nero's preferences. This wasn't simple exercise, but a comprehensive program designed to alter your posture, movement, and physical presence to match the emperor's idealized vision of masculine beauty, combined with feminine grace. Voice training represented one of the most technically challenging aspects of your transformation. Imperial specialists worked to modify your natural speaking voice, teaching you breathing techniques, speech patterns, and vocal modulations that would make you sound more pleasing to the emperor's ear. The goal was not just refinement, but fundamental alteration of one of your most basic characteristics. Clothing and personal presentation became tools for psychological as well as physical transformation. You were dressed in styles that gradually feminized your appearance while maintaining enough masculine elements to avoid obvious contradiction. The changes were incremental enough that you might not notice the overall effect while still experiencing the psychological impact of altered self-presentation. The social protocols you were taught for interacting with the emperor and court were designed to reinforce your submissive role while making that submission feel natural and appropriate. You learned elaborate courtesies, deferential behaviors, and conversational techniques that positioned you as an admiring audience for imperial brilliance rather than an independent participant in interactions. Intellectual development continued throughout your transformation, but it was carefully directed towards subjects and perspectives that would make you a more satisfying companion for Nero. You studied philosophy, but only schools of thought that reinforced imperial authority. You learned poetry, but only works that celebrated absolute power. Your education was comprehensive, but completely one-sided. The gradual revelation of your true purpose was managed carefully to avoid triggering resistance or rebellion. Rather than being told explicitly that you were being transformed to replace a dead companion, You were allowed to piece together the truth gradually while being conditioned to see it as an honor rather than a horror. By the time you understood your situation fully, you had been psychologically prepared to accept it. The religious aspects of your transformation reflected Nero's belief in his own divinity and his right to reshape human beings according to his will. You were taught to see the emperor not just as a political leader, but as a divine figure whose desires represented cosmic order. This religious conditioning was crucial for making you complicit in your own transformation. Medical interventions became more intensive as your modification progressed, with imperial physicians using techniques that pushed the boundaries of ancient medical knowledge. Hormonal treatments, surgical procedures, and pharmaceutical interventions were employed to alter your physical development in ways that served the emperor's aesthetic preferences, rather than your health or well-being. The psychological pressure of maintaining your transformed identity while preserving some core sense of self created internal conflicts that the imperial household expected and prepared for. You were provided with psychological support designed not to help you resist the transformation, but to help you integrate it more successfully into your sense of identity. Your contact with family was carefully managed and gradually reduced as your transformation progressed. Letters were monitored and sometimes rewritten to prevent your relatives from learning the true nature of your situation, or from providing emotional support that might undermine your psychological conditioning. The goal was to make the imperial household your only meaningful source of human connection. The other palace inhabitants who witnessed your transformation had various reactions that revealed the different ways people adapted to serving a regime that routinely violated human dignity. Some servants seemed genuinely unaware of the horror they were facilitating, treating your modification as normal palace business. Others showed signs of distress, but felt powerless to intervene. The artistic community that surrounded Nero became complicit in documenting and celebrating your transformation through portraits, sculptures, and literary works that presented your modification as beautiful and voluntary, rather than tragic and coercive. These cultural productions served to normalize the emperor's behavior while providing him with lasting monuments to his power over human identity. Court physicians who oversaw your transformation included some of the most skilled medical practitioners in the ancient world, but their expertise was employed in service of imperial fantasy rather than human healing. The ethical compromises they made in facilitating your modification reveal how professional standards could be corrupted by proximity to absolute power. The legal framework that governed your status in the imperial household existed in a gray area between slavery and citizenship that allowed the emperor maximum control while maintaining some pretense of voluntary service. Your legal position was deliberately ambiguous, making it difficult to seek protection or redress while providing the appearance of legitimate relationship. The economic aspects of your transformation represented a massive investment of imperial resources in a single person's modification, demonstrating both the wealth available to the emperor and his willingness to spend it on personal obsessions rather than practical governance. The cost of your transformation could have funded significant public works or military campaigns. Social reactions to your presence in the imperial court vary depending on the observer's relationship to power and their understanding of your situation. Some courtiers seemed genuinely unaware of the coercive nature of your transformation, while others clearly understood but chose to remain silent for their own safety. The international implications of Nero's companion experiments were significant, as foreign dignitaries and ambassadors witnessed behavior that seemed to confirm the worst stereotypes about Roman decadence and imperial tyranny. Your presence at state functions became a source of diplomatic embarrassment that undermined Rome's reputation among its allies and enemies. The religious community struggled with how to interpret and respond to the emperor's transformation of young men into idealized companions. Some priests and theologians attempted to find theological justifications for imperial behavior, while others quietly prepared resistance strategies that would emerge after Nero's eventual fall from power. The military's reaction to imperial companion experiments reflected broader concerns about Nero's fitness for leadership and his priorities as emperor. Senior officers questioned whether a ruler who spent vast resources transforming young men into personal playthings could be trusted with the empire's defense and expansion. The administrative burden of maintaining your transformation required significant palace resources and staff time that might otherwise have been devoted to governance. Your daily care, medical monitoring, educational supervision, and security required a small army of specialized personnel whose primary loyalty was to maintaining imperial fantasy rather than serving public welfare. Your psychological state throughout this transformation process represented a complex mixture of genuine gratitude for imperial favor, growing awareness of your loss of autonomy, and desperate hope that perfect compliance might lead to eventual freedom. These conflicting emotions created internal tensions that palace psychologists monitored and managed to prevent complete breakdown. The technological innovations required for your transformation pushed ancient medicine and cosmetics beyond their normal boundaries, leading to developments that might have benefited broader society if they had been applied to healing rather than human modification. Your transformation represented a misuse of human knowledge and skill in service of imperial vanity. The cultural impact of imperial companion experiments extended beyond the palace to influence broader Roman attitudes toward gender, beauty, and human malleability. Artists, writers, and philosophers began exploring themes of transformation and identity that reflected the disturbing realities they witnessed or heard about at court. The economic network that supported your transformation included suppliers of exotic medicines, craftsmen who created specialized devices, and traders who imported rare materials from across the empire. This shadow economy revealed how imperial obsessions could create entire industries devoted to facilitating human modification. Your daily existence as Nero's companion involved a complex mixture of luxury and captivity that made it difficult to maintain clear awareness of your situation. Surrounded by beauty, comfort, and apparent admiration, you had to resist the psychological pull toward accepting your transformation as beneficial rather than tragic. The educational component of your modification included instruction in acting and performance that was designed to help you convincingly portray enthusiasm for your role, even when you felt internal resistance. You learned to mask your true feelings so effectively that even you sometimes lost track of what you genuinely thought and felt. The medical monitoring that accompanied your transformation was comprehensive and invasive, treating your body as an experimental subject rather than a human being deserving of care and respect. Palace physicians tracked every aspect of your physical and psychological development, adjusting treatments based on their observations of your response to various interventions. The social events where you appeared as Nero's companion required careful preparation and performance that turned every public appearance into a form of theater. You had to project happiness, devotion, and gratitude while surrounded by people who knew the coercive nature of your situation but chose to pretend otherwise. The artistic projects that documented your transformation created lasting records of imperial human experimentation that would survive long after you and Nero had died. These portraits, sculptures, and literary works served as both celebration and evidence of crimes against human dignity. The religious ceremonies that incorporated your presence as Nero's companion forced you to participate in rituals that seemed to sanctify your transformation while actually highlighting its violation of traditional values and divine law. Your role in these ceremonies made you complicit in your own spiritual degradation. The international visitors who witnessed your relationship with Nero returned to their home countries with stories that damaged Rome's reputation and may have influenced their decisions about future diplomatic and military relationships with the empire. Your transformation had consequences far beyond your personal suffering. The palace staff who facilitated your transformation included individuals at every level of the hierarchy, from senior administrators to junior servants, all of whom became complicit in human experimentation through their participation in your daily care and monitoring. Their involvement revealed how institutional structures could normalize and facilitate atrocities. The legal precedents established through your treatment as imperial companion created frameworks that could be used to justify similar human experimentation in the future. Your case helped normalize practices that violated fundamental human dignity while maintaining a veneer of legal propriety. The medical techniques developed for your transformation represented advances in human modification that could have positive applications if redirected toward healing and helping, rather than serving imperial fantasy. Your suffering contributed to knowledge that might benefit others if properly applied. The psychological methods used to reshape your identity revealed sophisticated understanding of human behavior that could be used for therapeutic purposes rather than coercive transformation. The same techniques that enslaved your mind might potentially be used to free others from trauma and mental illness. The artistic techniques developed to document and celebrate your transformation advanced Roman capabilities in portraiture, sculpture, and literary description in ways that enriched cultural expression even while serving disturbing purposes. Beauty and horror intertwined in ways that complicated simple moral judgments. The economic systems that supported your transformation demonstrated the empire's capacity to mobilize vast resources for individual projects, suggesting possibilities for large-scale beneficial endeavors if imperial priorities were different. The same organizational capabilities that facilitated your modification could potentially address poverty, disease, and other social problems. The educational methods used in your transformation revealed advanced understanding of learning and psychological development that could benefit future generations if applied to genuine education rather than indoctrination. Your experience contributed to knowledge about human potential that transcended its immediate tragic context. The technological innovations required for your transformation pushed the boundaries of ancient engineering and medicine in ways that expanded human capabilities, even while serving disturbing ends. Progress and exploitation intertwined in complex ways that defied simple historical judgments. As you stand in the Emperor's presence for the first time since your selection, months of preparation culminate in this moment when you must demonstrate that the transformation process has been successful. Every aspect of your appearance, behavior, and responses has been carefully crafted to satisfy Nero's need for a perfect replacement companion. The Emperor's reaction will determine whether you have achieved the impossible task of becoming someone else while somehow remaining alive yourself. The tears on Nero's face as he looks at you reveal both the depth of his grief for Sporus and his desperate hope that you can fill the void left by his predecessor's death. But those same tears also foreshadow the inevitable disappointment that will come when he realizes that no amount of transformation can truly recreate what has been lost. You are entering a role that cannot be successfully performed because it requires you to be someone who no longer exists. The weight of imperial expectation settles around you like chains made of gold and silk, beautiful but inescapable. You understand now that your life belongs not to yourself, but to the Emperor's need to believe that human beings can be reshaped according to his desires. Whether you can survive this impossible role remains to be seen, but there is no longer any question about what you have become. A living experiment in the limits of human transformation, a test case for whether identity itself can be manufactured and controlled. This is the story that historians prefer not to tell, the reality of what happened when absolute power met unlimited resources and human beings became raw material for imperial art projects. Your transformation reveals truths about human nature, political authority, and the relationship between power and identity that remain relevant today. In an age when technology provides new tools for human modification and social control, the story of Nero's companions serves as both warning and reminder that the fundamental questions about human dignity and individual autonomy never truly disappear. They simply take new forms in each generation.